शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। यत्परं ब्रह्म सर्वात्मा विश्वस्यायतनं महत् सूक्ष्मात् सूक्ष्मतरं नित्यं तत्त्वमेव त्वमेव तत् जाग्रत् स्वप्न सुषुप्त्यादि प्रपञ्चं यत् प्रकाशते तद्ब्रह्माहमिति ज्ञात्वा सर्वबन्धैः प्रमुच्यते। त्रिषु धामसु यद्भोग्यं भोक्ता भोगश्च यद्भवेत् तेभ्यो विलक्षणः साक्षी चिन्मात्रोऽहं सदाशिवः मय्येव सकलं जातं मयि सर्वं प्रतिष्ठितम् मयि सर्वं लयं याति तद्ब्रह्माद्वयमस्म्यहम् अणोरणीयानहमेव तद्वन्महानहं विश्वमहं विचित्रम् पुरातनोऽहं पुरुषोऽहमीशो हिरण्मयोऽहं शिवरूपमस्मि अपाणिपादोऽहमचिन्त्यशक्तिः पश्याम्यचक्षुः सशृणोम्यकर्णः अहं विजानामि विविक्तरूपो न चास्ति वेत्ता मम चित्सदाहम् वेदैरनेकैरहमेव वेद्यो वेदान्तकृद्वेदविदेव चाहम् न पुण्यपापे मम नास्ति नाशो न जन्म देहेन्द्रियबुद्धिरस्ति न भूमिरापो न च वह्निरस्ति न चानिलो मेऽस्ति न चाम्बरं च एवं विदित्वा परमात्मरूपं गुहाशयं निष्कलमद्वितीयम् समस्तसाक्षिं सदसद्विहीनं प्रयाति शुद्धं परमात्मरूपम् यः शतरुद्रीयमधीते सोऽग्निपूतो भवति सुरापानात् पूतो भवति ब्रह्महत्यात् पूतो भवति कृत्यात् पूतो भवति तस्मादविमुक्तमाश्रितो भवति अत्याश्रमी सर्वदा सकृद्वा जपेत् अनेन ज्ञानमाप्नोति संसारार्णवनाशनम् तस्मादेवं विदित्वैनं कैवल्यं फलमश्नुत इति।
That which illumines the world of waking, dream, deep sleep, etc. That Brahman am I. Thus realizing one is liberated from all bonds. So we concluded in the last class by saying that the most important aspect of our awakening is the awareness of our bondage. It is a very high call to keep the thought of I am Brahman all the time, which is what is suggested. Even to keep the thought that I am not this, what I believe myself to be now, is a very difficult task. All this comes only when we are acutely aware of the bondage. So we said this bondage is a invisible rope at the mental level which ties us at all levels. It makes us not move. The opposite of bondage is liberation. So a person can be ultimately liberated. The final liberation can come only by this process, that which enlivens all the three states. I am that Brahman. If we are able to sustain and maintain this thought, by which process we will be ultimately able to merge with that Brahman. This mantra gives a very interesting term, not very critical, but it gives a insight into what people may consider or what people may think of other states of consciousness other than what is normally discussed throughout this Upanishad, which is Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti. After that he says Adi. Adi means beginning from that, etc. Why always these three states are only discussed everywhere in Upanishads or any other Vedantic literature is these three are the common states. These are the three main states that everybody goes through at all points of time. Nobody is sort of exempt from this. And this is, you can say, if at all other states are also discussed, this can occupy anywhere between 99.9% of our experiences. So this is the main thing that we need to understand. Once you understand the principle, this applies to all other states. What are the other states? It's not really states. Everything fits into this general matrix only. But suppose some person argues about what about a person who is in a coma stage, where he is in a sort of very deep unconscious state. Coma state is like also deep sleep only. But it is in a very, very deep state where from a deep sleep you can shake a person and wake him up. From that stage you cannot automatically do that. All his faculties are absolutely withdrawn there. But equivalent of that is deep sleep only. Or suppose a person who is in a state of a trance. When we say trance, I am not talking about a conscious meditative stage. That is also different. Trance is when your mind gets lost in something by itself and you are not knowing what is happening here or there. Your eyes may be open. That sort of a state, what you will put into, whether he is dreaming or waking, all this confusion need not be there. That is also some state in your waking state. That's about all. Some people may go into a deep yogic meditation. They are not in the absolute state of self-realization. The mind may be in the absorbed state also. What is that state? Will it form into any of these three? That is also one of the states of consciousness. That's about all. So some people, when you say that he is talking while sleeping or he is dreaming and is walking somewhere, will you say that he is a waker who is walking or he is obviously in a dream state only now? There are various intermediary things like this. So all these things should not be taken into for analysis in a different or segregated manner. What is most important is to understand that these three major states are there. Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti. Then he says Adi. Whatever you can conceive of, you add everything to this. Focus is not that. That is what he is coming. The focus is Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, Adi, Prapancham. The worlds that are created out of these states of consciousness, that all your experiences, yet prakashate, that which enlivens this. So these three states of consciousness gains vitality for the experiencer, for the subject, because of the Atma that is enlivening it. So our focus must be on that Atma which enlivens these three states of consciousness. Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, Adi, Prapancham, Yat Prakashati. That which enlivens this, that which makes this all function, that which gives the power to all these states of manifestation. Tad Brahma, that Brahman Aham, that Brahman am I, iti jnatva. Only by knowing that Sarva Bandhe Pramuchyate. So final bondage goes only upon supreme knowledge. This has been dealt in mantra 9 itself. He is reiterating again that ultimate liberation comes only by absolute knowledge. All the sadhanas, upasana, every karma that we do will all maybe make your mind pure and take you up to that stage. But when are you completely removed from the bondage is only when you are established in that higher state of consciousness, which is actual knowing. So the parallel example is like a person is liberated from all bonds of the dream only when he is having the knowledge of the waking state. So like that it should be taken. This I principle, which identifies with the body, mind and intellect, has formed this individuality which is the ego. This ego goes through all experiences, and the bondage is what has been caused, as it is described in mantra 14 as punascha janmantara karma yogat, by the bondage of action performed in various janmas, previous births. So what we have done to ourselves is that slowly over a period of time we have hypnotized ourselves to believe that we are this body, mind and intellect. We are this body. This hypnosis has come over a many births. It has come over many janmas, that this attachment to this individuality. So therefore the solution to that is a dehypnotizing, like how you give the poison as antidote to the poison in a different way. Like that, a different thought has to be given as antidote for this type of a hypnotic thought. That is the thought of I am Brahman, I am the self. So therefore you will follow this thought pattern here, which will culminate in 19. In 16th mantra he is talking about the Upadesha mantra, which is Tattvam Masi, Tattvameva Tvameva Tat, as master is giving the Upadesha to the student that you are the self. Now he is giving that method of the practice. Now you practice that I am that Brahman. So this is Abhyasa. So I am Atma Brahma is a Abhyasa Vakya we discussed given in the Mandukya Upanishad. So this is like that. So he says only by practicing this can you release yourself from the bondage. In the good old days, or maybe even now they practice, when you bring logs of wood from the forest, a woodcutter goes, he cuts and he makes it into smaller logs, and then he has to carry it on his head and come. It has to be one bundle, only then he can do it easily, because already it's heavy, and when it is going to be loose it is not possible to carry. So what he does is that he ties the entire bundle with a rope. This rope has to be very tight, because if he is walking some distance, few kilometers he is going to walk, he cannot afford to stop in between and attend to this again, because after hard work he has to quickly take it. So this with the rope, what he ties is a very tight knot. It's very tight, and he puts in all the effort there to put it in a very tight way. After he comes home, when he wants to untie this, it is not easy, because it is very tight. He has used all his strength to tie it, so that means he needs some more strength to loosen it, to untie the knot. How is it possible? Any idea what is the technique they use?
Take out one piece of
It is so tight, it doesn't really come. Cut. Every time you cannot afford to cut a rope.
I think they take it in circles instead of tying the knot.
to make us better.
No, I am saying he has tried and taken it. Now how to untie this?
Only the
He can take out the locks. He can take out.
That's why I am saying it's so tight, it is not easy to take out.
Everyone put out.
That's what I am saying, it's not possible.
He puts a stick into the knot and
It is so tight that it is not possible to sort of do anything to it directly.
How are the knot?
Huh?
You just put one side and it comes out.
This is one side of the log you are saying.
No,
Not.
one string.
Ha,
I have different
it is, that's what, see, it is, if it is that easy, something could happen and suddenly that can also, something can happen while he is on the way also. So they make it in such a way. See, suppose you transport something from here to Chennai or Bombay, you are not bothered about, how they are going to open the knot. Your concern is how to transport the goods properly. So you will make sure that during the transit, nothing happens to it. So it will be absolutely tight in every sense. So you cannot afford to have any accident or mistake along the way. When you go there, let's see. Of course, in transport and all, it's clear. You can cut the ropes and it's all very clear. Here, what they do is, In fact, it is probably done by 1 or 2 persons, we don't know. They bring in another rope, and the another rope is tied along with this rope, and this is made with 2 persons pulling from 2 ends, not necessarily a knot, but they pull it in such a way that it is even more tighter. Only when this becomes more tight can the other thing can become 1% loose. Then you can untie the knot. So it is by a, so it is very interesting simile that you want to loosen it, you want to untie it, but the process that you use is that you have putting more tight on it. You are putting a more tight rope on this. Now this parallel is applicable in all aspects of our sadhana. Our Shastra karma is like that. Our karma, which has actually bound us, it has made a strong bondage that we are not able to untie it. So the Shastra karma is like another tight bondage that is given to you, but it is not a bondage with a knot, but it sort of binds you in a disciplined way. By that discipline, when you are able to confine yourself even more, the other things becomes a little loose. Only then that can be untied. Exactly the same thing you understand with reference to the thought. So the thought which is occupying in our mental realm in a very tight way, it doesn't leave us. There is a bondage. So you cannot try and deal with it in a direct way. That's what we do. We try to untie the knot or we try to take the log out. It is so tight. So all that is not probably going to work. I mean, practically. So practically you have to have another thing which you think of, where you are creating a parallel thought flow with more force. Only when that thought force becomes stronger can this become somewhat loose, and then you can relieve yourself of the bondage. This thought of the self is finally that self, the thought that is given here as Aham Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman. It is, I am not, so all our thought so far has been that I am this body, mind, intellect. When I say this, it is not a conscious thought like that I want an apple or something. This I am body, mind, intellect is an inherent thought, where there is no doubt about it. You will not think about it at all. So it is because it is so engrossed in us. So that is a sort of a deep-rooted thought. So the deep-rooted thought can be shaken only when the antidote is something like this, that I am not this body, mind and intellect, but then who am I? I am that Brahman. This sort of a practice. Only a human being has the capacity to consciously identify himself with the matter or the spirit. No other creature has this capacity. Though every living being is a combination of spirit and matter, only human being has this conscious choice. This choice to identify oneself as the spirit or the matter. In other words, every creature is born with a nature and they have to live with that nature and die. A human being is there. We saw in that 11th mantra when he talks about as Arani, you have a lower nature and a higher nature. So from lower nature to move to the higher nature is our sadhana, it's our effort, it's our purpose. So for which he says, catch hold of the higher nature by thought. Keep on holding on to that. Keep it in the back of your mind and then perform your actions. So this thought must not be left. You should not leave this thought. By doing so, tad brahma aham iti jnatva sarva bandhe pramuchyate. So when you are absolutely established in that, when you are absolutely in that state of enlightenment, you are completely removed from all bondage. So relatively also, to the extent that we are able to attach ourselves to higher aspects of life, the lower aspects get dropped from us. This is a process, but what he is talking about here is the ultimate state of self-realization. So the principle that works here is, as you think, so you become. It is not a mechanical repetition, but a deep feeling. Even if you are able to do this for even a few minutes in a day, do that with a very deep conviction and a purpose and a shraddha. With that, if you are able to do, that sort of permeates and percolates the personality. With that thought, and what strengthens that is study and reflection only. You do that, and then with that thought, when you contact the world, you will be somewhat insulated. The other thoughts which will try and take us away from this and again get us rooted into that samsara, their effect will be reduced. So as you think, so you become. This is actually leading to the practice of objectivity. And the practice of objectivity is what he is going to describe in the next mantra. Yes.
Sir, normally the process of education is that you go from a known to a unknown.
Right.
But in this case, this is so subtle, the final thought, which is unknown to us.
Right.
So, how do we like assert ourselves that to an unknown thing?
Good question. See, the thing is, it is correct that the knowledge proceeds from the known to the unknown. And various places it has been established and very authentically given that Brahman cannot be known. Brahman is inconceivable. You cannot keep anything in your thought, etc. When it comes to practical application of this, I would say from our level, we have to get our thought pegged in certain practices which are even terrestrially elevating for us. Forget about self and self-realization. With the self-development to go even to the next level, what is suggested in Vedanta is that you keep the thought of some higher goal or a higher ideal and then work towards it and do various other practices which are given, because we say Vedanta at the practical level is it's experimental science. So you have to apply it in yourself to see. So when does the knowledge get rooted in you deeper? Only when you are convinced at the anubhava level or the experience level. There is no more greater pramana than your experience. Once you know for sure it is, and you are able to understand and read the experience correctly within you, there need not be any Bhagavad Gita or Upanishad supporting it. There need not be any external authority who is giving his recommendation for that. You know it for yourself. So the ultimate pramana is your experience only. For that experience also, even at the relative level, suppose we say that let's say you try to maintain cleanliness at all levels. It helps you to improve your thinking or whatever is the process that is given, or you try to keep a higher goal and work, the lower will be added on. These are also not really known at the present level, but you can somewhat connect to it and you can experiment it and see whether it works or not in a short run also. When I say short run, it will be few months to a year where you can apply it on yourself. How, let us say, you cannot be selfish and be happy. You cannot be unselfish and be unhappy. These are also the laws that are given. But there are certain areas where we have not operated so far. To get into that area is unknown again. But with the knowledge as the base, we try and do this as experiment. When you do this and see that it works at the relative level, then what happens is that the Shraddha in the unknown becomes stronger. The faith in the unknown becomes stronger. So when a guru finally comes into our life and he says that you are Brahman, we have a utmost unshakable faith there. That becomes a strong Shraddha. So that there is no doubt about it now at the intellectual level. The faith is very strong, yet you cannot really conceive it or keep it. So that is why he is going to say, we will see in the next and the following verse, assertion directly here is not possible, but we have to first do what is negation. So negation is to say that I am not this, I am not this, I am not this. So when you are not there, the mind has something to hold on. What is it? We don't know. So therefore that is Brahman, which is inconceivable, which is without any form, without anything. There also mind cannot go. So therefore even for us at the initial stage of the sadhana, there can be a prop which you can hold on to as the Supreme Self. You hold on to it as it is. It could be Om, it could be anything for your inspiration. Keep on practicing that. That is why in the beginning stage of this Upanishad, we saw that both the form and the formless aspect of Brahman, both are emphasized here. In the mantra 6 and 7, where he talked about Lord Shiva as the idol also, Murti also for us to contemplate upon. So therefore hold on to the truth in a form that it is very easy for you or holdable for you, and then based on the power of that thought, based on the, what is the test that is given in one way for purity of thought in terms of your true love to God, that there is, I don't know what tree it is, it produces a seed, it falls from the tree, but it gets attached to the bark or something like that. There is some sort of a paste or something, it gets quickly get attached. Even if you separate it, there's some sort of a magnetic thing that it gets attached. So a stage will come where even if you forcefully take the thought of the self out of from you, it will again come back to it. Irresistibly, it will come back to you. So such a mind where God occupies, as it were, there cannot be any negativities or impurities that is staying there. It is a sort of a test. Like we say that how you are able to genuinely feel the happiness of others is a test. This is one test that is given. It may be difficult for us because as we now experience the thought of our family and the thought of our money and thought of our social samsar and office samsar, everything that is preoccupying our mind. Hardly we find time to really concentrate upon the self. And these are the experiences of even great jnanis in their initial stages of sadhana. That they are not even able to have the meditative concentration for even half a minute. And such persons, when by sustained meditation, by sustained practice, they say that later, even if for half an hour to 1 hour they are absorbed in it, they don't know what is, that it is equivalent to half a minute only. It is not to say the experiences of great masters, because that will not be of use unless, it is just for an inspiration. That is why autobiographies and biographies of yogis and all should not be taken as a rule book for your sadhana. It may be for inspiration. What has to be followed is given in Gita and other things. That's what we need to follow. But our Swamiji also has said, with reference to his certain personal experiences in a private discussion, that's why I'm saying here, that it is like that. The time could have gone to 45 minutes to 1 hour, but it is just like the same 5 minutes or 1 minute. You won't know that absolutely to that state it will take us. So it is through abhyasa and it is through stages that we go. But what he is given here is in the absolute. Yes.
How does one connect this to when Krishna tells Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita that it's better for you to worship me in form rather than formless?
It is the Adhikari Veda. So Arjuna, having seen the Vishwarupa Darshana in 11th chapter, he is asking with reference to which is a better way of worship. So with reference to the Adhikari that Arjuna is, the extroverted person that he is, which probably represents all of us, he says, both are going to reach me, but surely worshipping me with form is much, much better. This is a statement which has to be contextually understood with reference to who is asking the question, and the master is giving the answer at his level. But he very clearly says, those who worship the formless reality also, definitely they are going to reach me. They are smart enough. They have that capacity to reach me. Then he says, Klesho adhikatarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam. A little bit more difficult is that. So blessed are those people who are able to connect to that formless reality straight away. But for majority of the humanity, it is easy to relate to that absolute reality with a form. Particularly given the time where it is talked about as Kali Yuga, it is rather very, very difficult to keep the mind aloft in that absolute thought of formless reality. So it is given like that. So it is to be contextually understood there.
So here the Adhikari is somebody beyond Arjuna, not for...
Yes, here the Adhikari is, we discussed in the beginning, Ashvalayana.
So here...
So to the Ashvalayana, he has explained everything, and finally he is saying, by holding on to that thought that I am Brahman, you are liberated from all bondage. And what we are now understanding is that same mantra can be applied and understood for us at the relative level also. But Upanishad is Upanishad. It is talking about the highest level of truth. Yes.
Sir, the period between death and rebirth, though we don't know about it, but since we're talking, under which of the three states does that?
That's what it is. It's a very unknown area. But again, if you want to draw a parallel, when you say it is a sleep. So in sleep, you have two states, which is either dream or deep sleep. Deep sleep is without dream. So the phases that it is said that we go through various lokas are equivalent or congruent or similar to dream. If you are going into unmanifest, there also it's sleep. So both are possible there as it is.
Sir, this mantra,
Yeah.
the example you have given was the intensity of sadhana. We are talking about that only, no?
Which example? The rope example.
Yes.
No, not just the intensity. I am saying, for a poison to be taken out of your system, they give a medicine which is somewhat made of poison only. To take a thorn out of your flesh, you have to use another thorn only. Similarly, to relieve yourself of the bondage of the thoughts that are preoccupying us, you have to use a powerful thought. That powerful thought is the thought of the self. So it is just not the intensity. It is just not the intensity. I am saying it is a parallel thought in a different direction. It is some other thing in a different direction. Obviously, intensity is there because the tightness of this rope has to be more intense than that. Otherwise, how will it relieve it? It will not relieve it. That which illumines the world of waking, dream, deep sleep, etc., that Brahman am I, thus realizing one is liberated from all bonds. We will chant mantra 18 twice.
त्रिषु धामसु यद्भोग्यं भोक्ता भोगश्च यद्भवेत् तेभ्यो विलक्षणः साक्षी चिन्मात्रोऽहं सदाशिवः त्रिषु धामसु यद्भोग्यं भोक्ता भोगश्च यद्भवेत् तेभ्यो विलक्षणः साक्षी चिन्मात्रोऽहं सदाशिवः.
Whatever in the three states is the object of enjoyment, enjoyer and enjoyment. Distinct from them I am, witness, pure consciousness and ever auspicious. Experience consists of three factors. There is a subject, there is an object, and there is a relationship between the subject and object which is called experience. The subject is the experiencer or the knower. The object is the experienced or known. And the actual experience is the knowledge, is the actual experience. That is when subject and object come together and meet. That is when experience is born. So every experience has these three factors. And this is there in all our three states of consciousness. That is why he says Trishu Dhamasu. Trishu Dhamasu means in all the three cities, in all the three states. Yad Bhogyam Bhokta Bhogascha Yad Bhavet. So there is that which is enjoyed, that which is the enjoyer, and that which, therefore there is an enjoyment. Particularly, it is very clear the subject-object relationship in waking and dream. In deep sleep, it is not a very clear-cut relationship of a subject-object because the whole thing is withdrawn into blankness, yet it is a conditioned consciousness. That much you understand. That much we have to remember, that the experiencer is the deep sleeper because he has not yet identified with the Supreme Self. He is a prajna, and what he is staring is at a blankness, as it were. So that is the object of experience. You have to take it like that. But a strict subject-object relationship is not there. Everything is like in a withdrawn form there. But it is still a state of conditioned consciousness. Okay. Now, these three are essential for experience. He says, I am different from all this. So this mantra is actually giving a formula by which we can practice objectivity. The word is also coming here. Tebhyo Vilakshana Sakshi. Sakshi is a very important word, very beautiful word, which describes the state of an absolute witness. The Supreme Brahman or consciousness is an absolute witness to everything that is happening. So he says that I am different from all this experience. I am different from all these things. The moment we say experience, the gross body is the ayatanam or the base or the headquarters where all the experiences are happening for you, as far as you are concerned. The subtle body is the instrument of experience. So the moment you say experience, all this gross body, subtle body, everything is coming into play. But he says, I am different from this. And this I, you mix with all the experience. I am doing, I am acting, I am seeing. It is all the experience. The experience of even I am awake, I am dreaming. Of course, you don't say I am dreaming, I dreamt or I slept. All these are also experiences. So all these experiences are connected to this I. But that I remains undisturbed by all these experiences in its pure form. Actually, the last mantra it says that which enlivens everything. Having enlivened everything, it remains as a sakshi of everything. That's all. So, technically, it does really nothing. Just as the best example or parallel here is that of the sun above. The sun above is the enlivening principle as far as everything in the world is concerned. No activity can happen, whether it is the formation of clouds, whether it is rain, whether it is then producing vegetation, then sustaining life. Everything is there only because sun is there. If sun were to switch off, we are instantly gone. When I say instantly, within minutes it's gone. So sun is the whole enlivening principle. But what does it really do? It really does nothing. It is just being there. Being there itself is the whole power. The power of sun does everything. So it is both a enlivening principle, at the same time it is just looking at the world like a sakshi. Whatever happens in the world, whether it is a tragedy or comedy, whether you go through ups or downs, each and everything requires and happens because of sun only. As always, we give this example of a procession of marriage is also waiting for sunlight to come, and everybody is happy, dancing and going. A procession of death, funeral procession is also coming after that. They are also waiting for sunrise to take him to the burning ghat. Lot of sorrow and despair and despondency is there. Both are happening because of sun, yet the sun above is neither happy nor sad about this. It is a neutral witness. So the understanding of the term witness has to be little deeper. Then it will capture the spirit of the word sakshi. Sakshi is an enlivening principle plus a witness. In other words, it is not a very indifferent witness. It is not a tamasic witness. Suppose you say that when you use a binocular and you see through it, or you see a telescope through a telescope. Actually, the telescope is an instrument which is used to see what is on the other side. Binocular also. But if the binocular is kept just like that, you can say it is just looking, it's just seeing, but it's not actually seeing. It is a lifeless object. I mean, what is the experience that is there? Similarly, as though in a lifeless way you are looking at things and getting not affected by it is not a big deal. That is total indifference. When you are able to make everything happen and yet distance yourself as a sakshi, that is the beautiful state of objectivity. That is pure objectivity. Now here he says, Tebhyo vilakshanaha. I am different from them. I is different from them. It is very hard for us at the practical level to distance our eye from the body, mind, intellect equipment. Because as I said, our bondage to us has been very strong over many, many janmas. And yet, we can use the logic and reason given in Vedanta to educate our intellect slowly. Not only that, let us be clear also, this Vedanta is not to be given to a adhikari who is not really wanting to learn or who is not having Shraddha. It's all very clearly given. Not only here, in Gita also it is given. So our job is not to try and go and convince somebody who is a atheist or who is going to carp this knowledge or who is going to belittle this knowledge. Never ever deal with them with reference to this knowledge. But if genuinely some people, you see the spark in them and they are ready to learn, but they are quite logical and reasonable that they will not take things for granted, which is good, which is okay. Then you can give certain thoughts for them to think about as to why Vedanta is saying that, you are not your body, mind, intellect, you are something else. So, so even with reference to an atheist who says there is no God, Vedanta says forget about that question itself, whether there is God or not. You try to find out who you are. Go inside and try to find out who you are. If you are able to find out yourself, ultimately that answer of who is God is, the question of who is God is also answered. You get that answer also. So rather, it will appeal to those persons who are scientific, who are logical, who will want to go from known to unknown, such type of persons who are really genuine, but they may not take things for granted, which is, I would say, a right type of people. For them, this type of certain indicators can be given. Now, first and foremost thing is that when you say that, when you use the term my body, my mind and my intellect, even my prana, when will my prana go away? Somebody cries out in despair. That means the moment you say my, that my is a possessive pronoun. I possess that. So when I say my mobile or my watch, that means this mobile belongs to me. This watch belongs to me. I am not the mobile. I am not the watch. It's clear. So mobile can be segregated from me and shown. Unconsciously, we do use this term, my body, my hand is paining, my legs. And Swami, you have to read the first chapter of the Woods of God Realization. Swami Ramtirtha, he expounds this aspect of our personality through one statement of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, one full lecture. I mean, the way he goes about in a very systematic way is amazing. So he goes on to prove that how one by one you are not you. So it is all your possessions, not you. When you say my body, in the same way that my watch, it is my body. It is my hand, my every part of the body. Then you go inside, whose idea? My idea, my thought, my intellect, my mind, my feelings. So each and everything is as though possessed by somebody. We don't know that somebody. That somebody is definitely then apart from these things. The possessor and the possessed are different. In the same way, in the Kenopanishad Mantra 2, if you recall, he is going to say that that which is the subject, which is the real knower by definition, cannot be known. So, just as you are able to know everything, see everything, perceive everything, experience everything outside, are you not able to see and experience your body also? Are you not able to formulate the laws and rules of the body? You can study it as an object separately. It's possible. Exactly like that, in a subtler way, you can study about your mind and intellect also. Thoughts, your emotions. And there are people who are able to even go to the extent of keeping their prana away from themselves, which is a high level of yogic practice, but there are enough evidences and proofs. Though it is not a common thing, let us not even talk about it. But it's very clear that the body, mind and intellect are observed. It also becomes an object to that extent. So by definition, the moment you say the subject, the real subject is never known. What is that? So he says that I am different from it. Another angle, that is, all these are given in Vedanta treatise. Part B, chapter 1, it is given. For those who are interested, you can go through that when you reflect on this class. The other aspect that is given is, we see that each and every aspect of the world is changing. Not only every aspect of the world, every aspect of your personality is also changing. You are part of this world. So when you see that your body is constantly changing, the senses and their power, everything is changing. When you go inside, your mind is also changing. The rate of change will decrease, but change is there. Body constantly changes. Cells are replenished. It's a very direct and definitive change, and it can be perceived also. With instruments, you can measure it also. Your weight, pressure, this, that. And if you go deeper and deeper, subtler instruments can show each and every change. Constantly changing. Mind is also constantly changing. That is very clear in terms of the movement of your desires and thoughts. Not that alone. Your likes and dislikes also change. Your preferences change. Your attitudes change. Your moods change. Your emotions change. There is also change. And then you go to the intellect level, it seems more stable, but that intellectual ideas and ideologies are also subject to change. Maybe slower, but it will change. Even with reference to subtle intellect. When we say intellectual ideologies, it can be terrestrial. A person can be in communism for long, then he can change his ideology, socialism, capitalism, thisism, thatism, various ideologies. It is tough to change because the ideology gets rooted. but if you have knowledge, if you see that slowly it changes, it evolves. But what about subtle intellect, which is having just the thought of the self? Even there the intensity changes. You are broadening the idea also, it changes. The way you feel with reference to your different levels of meditation, that also changes. So when we say that the thought aspect of that self also, though it is fixated on the self, it is as good as the self, its intensity changes. Now we are able to observe all these changes. So Vedanta asks you to examine this, that how are you able to observe the change? Any change is observable only from a changeless substratum. So when body is changing, mind is changing, intellect is changing, everything is changing, then who is observing? From which standpoint is he observing? Tebhyo vilakshana sakshi. I am that sakshi which is different from all these things. So therefore, it is very easily understandable from our experience. If we go little deeper into our thinking, to conclude that I must be something apart from these things. And ultimate leveler is death. Unfortunately, the person who is dead is not able to see it. At least others must see and learn. In the Yaksha Prashna in Mahabharata, last question that is asked to Yudhishthira by the Yaksha is that what is the most amazing thing in the world? Ashcharya, most wonderful thing. He says that daily people see that others are getting killed or they are dead. They see. And even after that, they continue in the world as though that they are going to live there forever. The thought of that reality of the death, that lesson has not struck us even 1%. As Prince Siddhartha was confined to the palace where he was not exposed to outside world because the king said he must be in the ultra comfort and luxury all the time, not know any other side of the reality, other side of the world. Once he went out and he saw old age and death and disease. These are the three things: Jara, Marana and Vyadi. These three things, when he saw what is it that people are going through, it is a great awakening that came inside him. Then an inquiry into life in a very deep way he went. That is why he became Buddha. He was able to get deep into the experience to understand the reality of it. That this body, however much you try and protect and do exercise and eat right type of food, everything that you do, sometime or the other it has to give in. So we see that this aspect of death is a great leveler. But we somehow feel that we are immortal or it is not going to touch us. So therefore, at death, we see that there was somebody who was occupying this and it's not there anymore. He's left this. This body which was so dear, which was so respected, which was so loved, lies like any other piece of wood or a stone, and it's going to be burnt or buried shortly. That's about all. That's the value. That is the actual value that it has. But so long, so much value and so much importance it was having because of something inside. What is that something? Who is that? You know, this sort of a thing, if you are able to contemplate, then you will understand that there is something beyond all the bodies. So, the separation between gross body and Atma is somewhat easy to relate to with the logic. But the separation with reference to the subtle body and Atma is much more difficult. Swami Ramtirtha gives a very beautiful example. He says that you keep a crystal ball in the background of a blue cloth. The crystal appears blue, and from a distance you see it's like a blue crystal. Then that person takes you near, or from there he brings the crystal and he says, see, the blue color is not in the crystal. Blue color is different and crystal is different. This is easy to understand once you understand it this way. But then he asks the next question, is the blue color inherent in the cloth? Is the blue color inherent in the cloth? No. He says the cloth is as any pure cloth, it's white cotton or whatever it is. And through the process of chemicals on it and dyeing and various other processes, they have made this cloth blue. And this blue and white cloth are now so merged that it is impossible to segregate them, as though impossible to segregate them. But if you again, like this tightening of the rope example, you again apply a process which is more powerful than this, some powerful bleach you use and other powerful scrubbing of detergents and everything that you use, and you consistently do it, a time may come where the blueness segregates in the water and goes away, and the cloth remains as it is. In the practical way, the cloth may be a little torn or something, that all is different, but you can understand that the original cloth is not what it appears to be. He says the mingling of the subtle body with the Atma is like that. It is as though seeming inseparable. That is why when we say the Atma moves after death, it is the Atma in the conditioned consciousness way along with the subtle body and the causal body that it moves. That is why it has a relative immortality, because it continues to move and move. When it will end the journey, we don't know. Upon self-realization only it will happen. So therefore it is as though like a thing it will go. But the truth is, the Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Atma, which is untainted by this. In that example of sun and the reflected sun, the sun above is not touched anyway by any of this conditioning that the reflected sun appears to go through. The reflected sun takes the properties of the mirror. The mirror is blue, the sun is blue. The mirror is broken, the sun is broken. The mirror is dirty, the sun is dirty. All this is affecting the reflected sun. The real sun is not having anything to do with this. It is absolutely pure. That is the purity that is being talked about here. Tebhyo vilakshana sakshi. I am that pure consciousness which has nothing to do with all these things. It is out of our ignorance that we bind ourselves with this thing and we think that we are this body, mind and intellect. So, I have nothing to do with this. So, when you are able to go through these points of discussion in our contemplation, in our reflection, then slowly the thought of reality should sink deeper within us. When the critical mass goes that side and it is a heavier thought, you will start feeling that contemplation little more easily that point of time. For now, we will learn it as a lesson, and it may be staying with us maybe during our class, during maybe your morning study, but then other thoughts are too powerful that it preoccupies us. It is like that. But we should not lose heart. We should keep this as a sustained practice. It really doesn't matter. We need not be result oriented. When am I going to realize the self or something? We have to keep it as a sustained practice, and we have to just enjoy our practice. Once you do that, you understand that I am different from this. So the whole thing comes in like the example of actor on the stage. In and through all the veshas that he goes through, one day he is playing Hamlet and he is going through extreme tragedy. Another day he is playing Lord Rama and he is going through as a hero of Ramayana. And another day is Krishna and enjoying the play with the gopis and the whatever he is play with the boys in the Vrindavan. Different moods and emotions that he goes through. But in and through all these things, if only he remembers that I am not all these things. I am just that actor who has put on this vesha. Similarly, when I put on the vesha of a gross body, I take the role of a waker and I just play in this waking world. When I put on the garb of only the subtle body, I become the Taijasa, the dreamer, and I just play in the city of the dream. When I put on the garb of absolute ignorance, causal body, then I am the deep sleeper, absolutely experiencing nothing. But I am not all these three things. This is one powerful verse in Gita also that we need to remember when it comes to anything that we practice here is Idam Shariram Kaunteya, immortal verse, second verse of chapter 13. Idam Shariram Kaunteya Kshetramitya Vidiyate Etadyo Vetitam Prahuhu Kshetrajneti Tadvidah. Everything, anything that you are concerned in the world is only Kshetra. This body is Kshetra. And everything in the world and our attachments are based on the body only. So this is Kshetra, this is field. But Kshetrajna is different. That's all we need to remember all the time. So what is the practice here? The practice is the Sakshi Bhavana. In practicing this, I am different from this, in the form of a pure Jnana Yoga, we don't need any big preparations or arrangements. Let's say if you want to do karma, you need to have an area of operation and you have to do big planning and to do karma. Even the bhakti, in terms of the gross bhakti that we do, you need to prepare for the puja, pilgrimage, this, that, various preparations are done. But this Jnana Yoga, what he is talking about, Tebhyo Vilakshana Sakshi, I am not this, I am this. It is a thing to be practiced which is automatically and naturally available for us from the world at all points of time. So, even to say that I am not this body, mind and intellect, I am the self, it is rather difficult in the beginning. This is pure Jnana Yoga and it is going to yield results which are also very powerful. But the adhikaris are few for this, but it doesn't matter. We have to say what is the effect of this. One step before that is, even anything that is coming from the external world, which are both pairs of opposites, if you are able to distance yourself from them, that itself is a practice. In Karma Yoga, what we do, how we distance ourselves, we have to do a hard work of karma, and then whatever results come out of it, first you start by distancing yourself from the result, that it is not for me, the fruit is not for me. The fruit can be good, bad, indifferent, whatever it is, favorable, unfavorable, all those things. But it is a process by which we do the hard Karma Yoga. In Jnana Yoga, Shita and Ushna are directly there. Okay, there is we need not work for that, it is there. There is a heat and cold in the world, in the universe. When heat and cold comes, how much we fret and fume in the summer saying that it's very hot, like that it is. Or in the cold we complain it's very cold, very cold. Why is this happening if we examine? It is because of our identification with the body only. So you say when heat comes, it is for my body, I am different. When the cold comes, you say it's for my body, I am different. Similarly, there are enough people around us who always give honor or dishonor to us all the time. There are some who are giving a negative vibration to you. There are some who give positive vibration to you. You say all this is for my intellect. Honor and dishonor is for my intellect. I have nothing to do with this. Some people give good emotions. Some people give bad emotions. Some people are nice. Some people are not nice. We need not work for this. This is there all the time. Sometimes the food is palatable. Sometimes the food is not palatable. Sometimes it's a little hot. Sometimes it's a little cold. Everything you relate with that experience. This is for my tongue. This is for my body. This is for my mind. This is for my intellect. I am different from all these things. So, when each and every experience actually hits us, you can use that experience to detach yourself from that experience. If a person is able to do that, he is actually practicing this Jnana Yoga. But as I say, it is tough to keep this practice on a sustained basis for the level of extroversion that most people like us have. But still, you have to understand, each and every ball, if it is hit for a 6, the runs are coming fast. Like that is Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is a direct means for liberation. And then how to practice objectivity at our own level, which we'll see in the next class. Yes?
Sir, what we are talking about, the Sakshi Bhav, it's the causeless cause, right?
What is causeless cause? Brahman is the causeless cause. We are talking about Sakshi Bhav versus sadhana. Yeah, just think about it. Yeah.
So when we talk about this witness aspect, people say that God is everywhere. Those who are a little weak in terms of transaction, this is the God is everywhere, is seeing everything, and at the right point of time, if you do this, then you will come and punish you. Maybe a solacing concept, but it is a concept that people do agree to.
It is not a solacing concept. It is a right concept also.
at that point of time, it gives him a solace that if I can't do anything, maybe
Yes,
invisible power will come and
Correct.
give him a punishment sort of thing. But simultaneously, we said that witness is enlivening principle as well as just the witness part. There are instances or stories, many stories are there where we see that some action has been done. Like I won't say maybe these ropes coming or somebody showing that my rod is eating something and actually it has been eaten. These type of stories do come where action is also coming. So how do we relate exactly to that witness? We said only witnessing and enliving, not acting. But here we see some action being performed. How do we link with that?
See, when we try to understand with reference to what is the mantra saying here, he says, Tebhyo Vilakshana Sakshi. I will take up this question in detail in the next class, but I'll give you a thought for you to think about. The mantra that is given here is Tad Brahmaham iti Jnatva, that I am Brahman. Okay. When we talk about Brahman in its pure form, in the Nirguna form that it is in its original pristine nature, it is Anama, Arupa, Achintya, inconceivable. All this is what it is. These are also, we can say pointers, but it is just what it is in its pure Satchidananda Swarupa, etc. Now the Sakshi also comes under that category only. In that form it is. You can't say form, you can't say anything about it. That same Brahman, when it is described as all-knowing, all-powerful, all-encompassing, and a refuge for all, Sarva Sharanya, Sarva Shakta, Sarva Vyapi, Sarva Antaryami, Antaryami of all. Like that, when we say, that is also same Brahman only, but we call it as a Ishvara. Ishvara is the same Tattva as Brahman, like that it is. This is the Ishvara who is actually looking at the whole world, doing everything in the whole world with its own power. That's what is given in the what we studied a few mantras before also, and Gita also it is all said like that. 1 minute, listen. It is the power, Maya Parimohitatma, we said, that is in conjunction with Maya only, it is doing everything. Having done everything, he just sits as a witness. Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hrideshe Arjuna Tishtati. He says in the mind of everybody else also, he is there looking at like a witness. We will see in Mundaka also, he says there are two birds. One bird is eating and one bird is a witness. Like that, it is a witness that is happening. As far as the fruits of actions are concerned, fruits of actions goes to the person who does the actions. And one who does the action is the individual. So according to the individual, somebody is making sure that these fruits of actions are going to him according to the law of karma. This also is making sure it is happening. Vedanta says this is the power or the main, one of the things that is attributed to the Tattva of Ishvara also. Now, simultaneously we also say Ishvara is a Kripalu. Ishvara is a compassionate person. You do bhakti to him, he will come and do everything to you. He is there to give his hand and uphold. And we see various stories of history, Purana, everything also functioning like this. Then we get confused as to what is his role exactly. Is he a neutral witness who is extremely like, as I said, just like a lawgiver and law controller? Or is he something more than that? That he really wants everybody to come and he's going to give us all support or everything? There is a slight dichotomy there. Now this can be understood when you are, because the mantra is saying as a practice for the individual, you are going to segregate everything else and say that I am Brahman. Now nowhere in the Shastras you will find or any statement even from a self-realized master that I am Ishvara. This type of a statement will not come. Even throughout Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna takes the position of Ishvara and speaking, because we believe in the concept of avatar, and avatar is that same thing coming in the form. That's how we believe. And in various places, Adi Shankaracharya downwards, various people have interpreted as this thing, where he uses the first person singular pronoun I, and he says in the legend of Ishvara only, because you have to surrender to me if you have to cross over the Maya, etc. All these statements are also coming. But never even such a person will make a statement that I am an Ishvara. We don't normally see. If you see, please point out also. Contrarily, we see that this I am Ishvara statement comes from the mouths of total Asuric people. Ishvaroham aham bhogi siddhoham balavan sukhi, he says in 16th chapter. I am Ishvara, who says? Hiranyakashipu says, or Ravana says. He only thinks, and they are all enjoying the temporary state of universal boss or something for some time, and that goes away. It is so. The differentiation you have to think about is what is the why is it that the statement I am Brahman is given, and why is it not that the statement that I am Ishvara is given everywhere? If you are able to think deeply upon it, we will come back to this again. Then you will understand what is the role of Ishvara. We will conclude with the bhajans here.
Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.